think that's a good segue maybe to answer that question. And it's not necessarily product versus service, but more what are the skill sets which an integrator should have in your opinion? And I also have an opinion, Dave, but I'll let you take a stab at this.
I appreciate that, Vlad. So to answer Nader's question, in my opinion, I don't think there's one particular skill set that an integrator should have. Right. To go back to Jay's question of how do you define an integrator? I think there are lots of different types of integrators. I think that there are integrators that we see who are really good on PLCs, or they build HMI screens all of the time. I think we've certainly talked to other folks like Addison that we'll talk about in just a moment. Addison spends most of his time on MES layers, right? And the skills that he needs to be successful on the MES layer and probably do some data analytics on top of that is very different than someone who's going to go work at a factory doing machine startup, going and doing networking, going and doing kind of a bunch of other things. So I would say, and it may feel like a bit of a cop out, Nader, and that is not my hope of being a bit of a cop out, but it really depends upon what you want to do. And beyond what you want to do, it might depend upon what sort of opportunities you have. To the previous point, in my experience, an integration firm starts based upon someone who is technically competent and probably has a couple of customers asking them to go do this thing, maybe cheaper, maybe faster, maybe better, or maybe just doing the thing in general. And so that is where the first kind of couple of customers come based upon the skill sets that you have. But it is not just kind of based upon those skill sets that you have. It is the opportunity of how can we go through the process of continuing to upskill, continuing to find things that are interesting for you. So very much based upon the situation.
If I can add to that, Dave, I think that my perspective is maybe a little bit different, and I think that we'll have a conversation about, like the end user's perspective and what's optimal for them and how to select the systems integrator, which I think like will tie into this question really nicely. But for me, if I'm the end user, right, like, and if I'm evaluating, and I want to say like this question is probably asked from a perspective of a smaller systems integrator, right? So I'm assuming that this is maybe a lot like 1 to 3 people shop, then I think that the skills I'm looking at should be extremely narrow, right? And what I mean by that is if I have a need, right? So I have, let's say, a factory that is running on a certain platform and I'm looking to commission new equipment and I'm evaluating certain systems integrators, then my understanding that the person coming in with a very narrow skill set is going to be, I want to say, 10 times better than someone who can solve problems across the board, right? And I'll give I want to say like a somewhat of a specific example. So if I'm looking for commissioning, let's call it HMI systems, then I would prefer someone who has, let's say, HMIs on, let's say, like Rockwell or Factory Talk View that is, let's say, as close as possible to my version versus someone who will list, and again, this could be on a skill set on their website, on their resume, someone that lists like I can do PLCs, I can do HMIs, I can do SCADA systems, MES, ERP, everything under the sun. Because again, the more time you spend perfecting a narrow skill set, my understanding would be that the better you're going to be suited for that specific need. Now, of course, again, there's caveats. If you're a larger systems integrator, then you should be able to meet the needs of an advisor, right? Like if I'm a manufacturer that's trying to figure out what needs to be done, then I will generally want a generalist to be able to come in and assess multiple areas. I think that the umbrella term of Industry 4.0 just encompasses so many different aspects that ultimately you should be knowledgeable to some extent. I mean, like broadly with all of them, but you should probably be specializing with one, right? Like, I mean, a general understanding is good, but I would doubt that a single person, which again, maybe it's 5 people within a team, would be like the expert on all of those topics, right? So you probably should be picking one and positioning yourself as the expert in that specific domain versus trying to, I want to say, encompass all of those skill sets. And which ones specifically, to his original question, well, I think any of them work, right? I think there's demand in data, there's demand in networks, there's demand in PLCs, HMIs, robotics. So I don't think it's as critical on, and again, like obviously I'm speaking in generalities. Maybe in certain industries, one is more in demand than another, but I would say that it's not as critical as which one you pick versus the fact that you specialize in one and have a general broad understanding of others instead of trying to master all of that. And as Greg pointed out, becoming a jack of all trades, but master of none. And again, that's my thought on it.
No, no, Greg says master of one.
Master of one. Oh, okay, okay, okay.
Yes.
Good. And
Yes.
that's
No,
exactly what it is.
I
In that case, like that's exactly what I'm trying to describe. So master of one. I think that's extremely critical.